Being 7 o'clock, we'll call the Marathon County Board of Supervisors to order. We will start with a Pledge of Allegiance, and that will be, please remain standing, because that will be followed by a silent moment of reflection. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And we will have the reading of the notice, please.
The adjourned annual meeting of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors, composed of 38 members, will convene at the Marathon County Courthouse, Assembly Room, 500 Forest Street, Wausau, on Tuesday, February 19th, 2019 at 7 p.m., and the agenda was duly signed and posted.
Thank you. I would like to have and request everyone please silence their cell phones or put them on vibrate as to not interrupt the meeting. And thank you. And we'd like to go on and please sign in. And we'll proceed. And I would like to welcome all of the visitors that we have here with us tonight, including the viewing audience. We have a pretty lengthy agenda, so we will be moving on. And so we will start with the consent agenda items 7 through 11B. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Butke and second by Supervisor Zereni. Is there any discussion on the consent agenda items? Any questions? Seeing none, we will proceed to vote. And we will proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. And we will move on to reports. And we have the 2019 Administration Work Plan by Administrator Carter.
Thank you. I'll be working my way through it. I'm not going to go through each box because you have it in front of you. And if you want to stop me and have me explain something, I will. But I've got it organized by standing committee and the work that will be associated with each of the standing committees. The first one came up at the last meeting after we had a presentation by the university and talked about its changing role. And we also noticed in the capital improvement plan that we're going to be funding somewhere in the range of $300,000 to upgrade that pool.
I don't know how helpful that will be because it's so big. Mm-hmm.
Size a little bit, maybe it'll kick over a little bit. Not bad. I don't know if you can read or not, but it's better than I thought we could do. So the issue comes up that you have a $300,000 capital investment in a pool, and we're now talking about a pool that's going to have more non-traditional students, and you know, we're expecting that the facility will be used for a long period of time. But if you're going to stick that kind of money in a facility, you don't want to stick $300,000 in and close it shortly thereafter. So this is going to have to happen fast. You know, we have to evaluate what the educational purpose is, what the other contracts are, what people's safety is, and it strikes me that either you're going to stick the money in or you're going to close the pool. I don't know that there's going to be a lot of middle ground, but we need to work on that. We need to think that through. Broadband access, two groups have actually got a piece of this. The first is the education Extension, Education, and Economic Development Committee, and they're more in the what side, I would say, and the Infrastructure Committee is more on the how. You know, what are the tools, and they don't separate that easily, but really what I'm trying to tell you is there are two standing committees both committed to working together to take a look at it from just a little bit different perspective, because broadband has been identified by multiple sources as the critical infrastructure for the next 20 years. And we are behind now, and we can't afford to stay behind, or that'll have an economic and social impact. And by the way, the new broadband access person for the extension I met, I think today, or was it yesterday, it seemed like a really awesome person. So I'm really looking forward to getting that started in earnest. And the next one was added at the at the executive committee. I don't have a lot of the boxes in there, but I think everybody knows what we're talking about. The school formerly known as UWMC is in trouble financially, as is the school known as UWSP. And we want our campus to stay open. We also want it to excel as it has in the past in high quality 2-year education. MBAs are nice, that will help keep it open, but our primary mission again is those first 2 years of college and access to places like UW-Stevens Point and Madison. That opens up a lot of doors to a lot of middle and lower income people that would not be available any other way. So I'll fill out those other boxes in concert with the executive committee as time goes on here, and we carve out a little bit. Working with them, they have to take the lead. I mean, I don't know enough about, neither do any of us, about that. What we need to be is supportive and make sure that they have the resources and the connections in the community to help keep that a strong student population, because that's the only way it's going to succeed financially. Environmental resources, POUTS. We've talked about this before. We're going to replace the state Wisconsin program with a Marathon County program. And we're going to exactly mirror it. We don't want to do it too soon because we don't want to have our money run out. It'll be a limited amount of money. When the state program's up, we have to be up and running right away. Next page, Executive Committee. And we've talked a lot about priority-based budgeting. And we've all got to get in the game here. And the goal here, I'm going to go to the outcomes, is each of the standing committees come up with something they can do less of for next year, even if it's small. So really it was the expectation is everybody's going to come up with one thing. And if it's the pool, well, Education and Economic Development Committee's in good shape already. And if it's not, then they got to come up with something else. But you know, just standing on the sideline saying, well, cut something else, isn't getting us to where we need to be. And I think we need to take some baby steps in terms of saying, these are the most important things that we need to fund, and these are of lesser importance, but still important, and we can do with a little bit less of that. Next one, Health and Human Services. The North Central Healthcare Campus is a mega project. It's going to take a long time to get it designed, most of the year, but the most important thing is below it, that aquatic therapy pool. What I put on there is the vast majority of the funders, particularly those that funded it. I don't want them to be satisfied with it. I want them to be delighted with it. Anything less is unacceptable. So we got to make sure that this is a high quality place that people who took money out of their own wallet to help fund feel good about. So, and I think we're well on track to accomplishing that. Next one, Human Resources, Finance, and Property. Long-term facilities plan. I kind of in my head know where, what we're thinking about. At what point we're thinking about moving highway department out to some other location and expanding Marathon Park and building the jail, and those are all major investments, but having it in my head doesn't help anybody. Let's get it down on a piece of paper and discuss it. I don't know that you can come up with exact years, but I think you can come up with sequences, and at least we know what's ahead of us. Otherwise, somebody pops up with it and scares everybody that this is coming tomorrow, and I think it's just better if we all agree on a long-range plan. Next one, develop a new funding policy for capital improvements. For 20 years, we had a great policy, but that great policy doesn't provide enough money anymore, and we're borrowing for it. And that might be our new policy. We need to continue to talk about how we're going to fund capital improvements, because it doesn't make sense long-term just to postpone capital investments. It ends up costing more, ends up with a big lump at the end. You have to keep up. You have a lot of facilities, you have a lot of community infrastructure. If you don't keep up, you will end up be sorry later. I'm on page 3 now. Compensation policy. You know, one of the issues since we went to pay for performance is that we've been economically strapped. We went to it in about 2008. And you know that by 2009, there was a recession and the money all over the place got tight. So we've really had 2% pay increases, total package. Well, that doesn't really help give a whole lot of range to distinguish people. Well, and you know what, going forward, there isn't going to be more money. So what I've had a conversation with the airport board who kind of believes that they should just, because they have some money now, because it's a good economy, pay their people different than the rest of the county people. I think that's a big mistake. We're a county pay system. So the real issue is that the most pressing issue at the airport and other departments is the top performers, the people who are at the top of the performance plan, the top 10% who are also below the midpoint. And what I'm proposing is that we set aside some additional money and come up with a policy so we move them more quickly to the midpoint. I've got a lot of department directors who are saying, you know, what about the good, solid citizens? They're good, and we need to keep them too. The problem is a percent increase, if we did it for everybody, just went to 3%, it's just less than $1 million. So, you know what, we can afford to do it for some, we can't afford it to anybody else. Where do you want to invest your money? And I think you invest your money on the top performers who are under the market pay. So that's my recommendation. Next one is create a funding plan for nonprofits. We talked about this at the last budget. We need to talk about it again. We've, I think, abandoned the idea of just everybody goes down the same percentage. I think we've come up with the idea that we're going to establish some criteria, run them through the priority-based budget system, and make some choices as to which programs we would reduce and which programs we would not reduce. And the next one is an educational program on financial issues. We've talked about this for years, and we've done it before. I think we need to do it again. You know, we always have a turnover on the board, and it's important that everybody participate in the budget discussions at a high level. In order to get everybody up to the same speed, I think we need to dedicate a little bit of time just coming up with some of the terminology and the concepts. Now, some of you will definitely be bored during this. You know, if you're a CPA, this is not going to be for you. But you know, I think you have to endure it at some level. Maybe we can post it before a regular meeting, and those that feel like they're not going to get out it won't come, or do it during a regular meeting, depending on how lengthy it gets. But the point that you want to keep in mind is we need everybody to participate. And at some level, we all have to be able to speak the same language and understand the same concepts, or you're going to have some people who could participate at a level that's not good for the group. See here. Next one, I'm down to infrastructure. Here's the broadband again. The infrastructure committee will be taking a look at it. They'll be looking at what is the structures. The highway right-of-way will become part of this. The towers that the county owns, towers that the county rents. And there'll be all kinds of things that may be a possibility in terms of how we can expand broadband. There's not going to be a single answer. And the last one is a long-term plan for road and bridge reconstruction. We have a plan that we talk about every budget time. And it's, you know, we have so many miles, and we repair, they last so long, and we repair a percentage of it so that they all come at the same time. And that plan is, I don't ever recall that being adopted by the county board. It's always adopted by the committee and used, and it served us well. But I think it's time to take a new look at it. I think you need to take a look at how much each particular road is used rather than just every road is the same. I think you need to take a look at, because you're just not going to have, going out the next 10 years, enough money to maybe do what you're doing now. And if you did have less, or if you had more, you need to have a long-term plan so you know where to invest it. That's going to be a tough one. But I think that even if it's not perfect, it'll be much better than not have it, or just continue with what we have. Or in the end, we may just say, you know what, the best is what we have. Let's just stick with that. But let's make that a decision by the county board to stick with that. I'm now on page 4. Uniform addressing, we've talked about that enough. We've got to get that done. Okay, let's get this over with. And whatever happens at Rib Mountain, we'll do what they say. Right? or won't we?
We'll find out.
We won't do what the court says? That's a potential, okay. Well, I don't know there's too many places to appeal it, but we'll see. The secure detention facility, it should be secure detention facility. There's a shelter, I got a typo on there that I didn't notice, but it's basically a jail for kids under 17. The goal is now not closure. You can see the goal is to raise the revenue. If we don't raise enough revenue, then we have to go to Plan B, because you see the next one is opening this additional police communications channel. So I'm completely committed now that the goal is to raise the revenue there, and then we don't have to face a closure, the personnel disclosure, and I know my luck. The minute we get it closed and everything settles down, they'll put 17-year-olds back in the juvenile system, and then we'll have to reopen and be hard to find people. So this is the better of the two options, but it has to work. I mean, we don't have a choice here. We can't fund that police channel, which we need, and the need has been demonstrated for, without it. And the last one is a regional morgue, and there was a while I thought that was a dead duck, to be honest. And the reason was that it could cover our revenue estimates. We're working with Wifley Consultants and a whole team of people, could cover our operational costs and just a little bit of a little bit of capital. And we've made a decision. If we're going to provide a service for more than our county, we're not subsidizing the other counties. So we're not building a building and then saying, well, you can just participate for the operational costs. Now we have a possibility, and we got a design that says we could do it relatively inexpensive. $2 million of cap, I think, was it $2 million? Was it less than that? If we utilize the pool area at, what was the pool area at North Central Healthcare. So without that, we were talking about $10 million building, just no way. So if we utilize that area, it seems like it fits. The architects who designed it are as close to the experts in designing morgues, and he did one before, as you're ever going to get, because it doesn't come up too often to design morgues. And so we're going to continue to explore that, and it probably could work financially if all the pieces come into play. We have to be pretty entrepreneurial. We have to have not just autopsies for criminal justice, but also for the medical situations where somebody dies unexpectedly. And we're also going to have, I got to think of what they call it, tissue donation firms that rent space from us, other places that could utilize and provide a revenue stream for us. But without that, it can't work. It can't work just on the fees of the autopsies. And we are at the blood bank, yeah. We're going to have prepared for you a complete business plan. So it won't be just a bunch of reports put together. It'll be a complete business plan, because this is going to be a business. And I don't think we should be in the business ourselves. We should have partners. The medical examiner suggested maybe Aspirus or one of the tissue donation places would help us with the capital and become a co-owner with us, or it could be some of the other counties. She's afraid of the other counties because the length of time it takes to make a decision. Well, we all know that. But at some point, we've got to be careful. We can't take all the risk ourselves and then just share the benefit with everybody else. This has got to be a solid plan, and if you want to benefit from it with us, then you have to be a part of this. We've got a long history of successful partnerships, North Central Healthcare, Central Wisconsin Airport, other programs that have been shared with other counties. I'm sure it wasn't easy when they put it together. I was here when we put together ADRC. Definitely wasn't easy. It definitely wasn't easy, but I don't think anybody thinks it was a bad idea. So I think we've got a new life on this, and we're going to put a lot of effort into it.
Okay, is there any questions for the administrator on his work plan? Any questions? Okay. We will move on to ordinances. Item number D, Environmental Resources Committee, Marathon County Code, Chapter 15, Private Sewage System Ordinance 1-19. And I've asked Becky Frisch from CPC, the director, to give a little presentation on the information that's contained in this ordinance and the reasons for it.
Good evening. I'm Becky Frisch. I'm the Director of the Conservation Planning and Zoning Department. And on your agenda are revisions to the county's private sewage system code. And so I'm just going to give a real short little PowerPoint about the code and then just open up to any questions anyone might have about what's going to be changing. First of all, our mission statement, to protect our community's land and environment because the economic strength and vitality of our community is dependent upon the quality of our resources. Through leadership, accountability, community engagement, and collaborative partnerships, we promote thoughtful and deliberate use of resources and innovative solutions to ensure Marathon County has a healthy people, a healthy economy, and a healthy environment today and tomorrow. Also tonight, the private sewage code is related to the strategic plan objective 6.3 to protect and enhance the quantity and quality of potable groundwater and potable surface water supplies. First of all, you hear us use the term POUTS. POUTS is the state term for private on-site wastewater treatment systems. Most of us just refer them as septic systems. The state has a uniform code that we follow that deals with POUTS or septic systems. And sometimes we get caught up in using acronyms a lot, and so I just wanted to pause for a moment, and when you hear this terminology, that's what we're talking about. I think what's critical to understand are POUTS are designed and engineered to treat wastewater. I know a number of you live in cities and villages and you pay a sewer and water bill and your sewage goes to the municipal sewage treatment plant. If you're beyond the boundaries of a sanitary district, you have some type of private wastewater treatment system. Those systems that are installed according to the code actually have treatment similar to a sewage treatment plant. It's that the soils provide that treatment, the air provides that treatment when properly designed and installed. So I just have a couple pictures here real quick, not to have any assumptions that you know what goes on. I think some of you are familiar with perk testing, or you hear about soils evaluation. The first step in the process, you're going to have a system installed, is to have your soils evaluated. I just stated that part of the treatment is reliant on the soils, and all soils are different, and all soils can handle treatment and some can't handle treatment. So a soil evaluation is an important step in the process. This might be difficult to see, but a common system in Marathon County is a mound system. These are just a couple pictures of a mound system. You'll see up on top the finished product, and on the two photos below, you will see where material is being installed, piping is being installed, all by licensed professionals in order to create this mound and the proper treatment that needs to happen in a POUTS or a sewage system. This is an example of a conventional system, and those are, when we say conventional, it means it's the good old systems that they install right in the natural soil. You're not hauling in soil. In a mound, you actually haul in the material to build the mound. You haul in the sand that helps with the treatment process. If your soils are good enough, you get to have a conventional system, and you do not have to haul in extra material, soil, to treat the wastewater. It can happen naturally with the soils you have there. So this is an example of chambers that are installed. The wastewater infiltrates and flows through these chambers and into the area of the system where the treatment happens. So that's just an example of a conventional. Unfortunately, these are systems that are are common in Marathon County, mostly on the east side of the county and in the areas where we have sandy soils that have sufficient depth above the groundwater. The mounds happen to be more common. And then there are holding tanks. This is an example of a holding tank, probably somewhere 8 to 10,000 gallons. It's a holding tank that was installed at one of our local dairies out in the rural area. It's basically where you have a big tank and all your sewage goes into the tank, and when the tank fills up, the alarms go off and you call your pumper and they come and pump out the tank. And then the pumpers legally dispose of that wastewater, either taking it to a sewage treatment plant, or some parts of the county you're actually allowed to land spread it, all with a DNR permit. So this whole thing is very highly regulated by the state. So what we're talking about tonight is that the state mandates counties to adopt an ordinance that conforms with the state code. I don't care if you're in Vilas County, Waukesha County, Jackson County, or Marathon County, all of our sewage codes, the county codes, are almost exactly alike. The state gives us very little latitude in terms of what can be in those codes, and those codes have to follow the state administrative rules and all of the specifications of how systems are installed. So these pictures could have been taken in any county. They're all going to be the same type of systems. And so we're very consistent with that because it's a state mandated. And that state mandate did come around in 1968. So counties adopted these sewage codes back in 1968, 69, and that's when Marathon County did. So the proposed revisions are to remain consistent with the current administrative code. So when the state makes some changes to the code, we need to go in and change our code to make sure we match up. The proposal that we have, I'll use an example where, if those, I mentioned perk tests, those of you that have been around for a while, way back when in 1969, 1975, and into just prior to 1980, actually all the way through the 80s, if you were going to install a septic system, you got yourself a perk tester. And that person would go out and dig some borings and pour some water in the hole, and that's how you'd figure out what kind of system you could put in. That was discontinued, but we still had those old records, some of which at some point were good. But one of the things the state just changed in the code is we can no longer use that 30-year-old information, 35-year-old information for the design of a new system. So we're basically discounting the work that was done with a flawed evaluation system, and we're no longer going to be able to use that. And that's what the state has mandated. So we had to go in and change our code in that regards. The other things we changed in the code is right now we have moved towards electronic submittal of documents. What that means is plumbers and designers can do their design in AutoCAD or some computer software, and they're able to submit those documents to the state electronically. And there was still reference in our codes about giving us 2 copies of this and paper copies of that. So we've updated the code to allow for easy electronic submittal of documents. The clarification of the code would be examples where there's some unclear areas of when we can do an inspection and can't do an inspection, and we just cleaned up some of that language to conform with the state code. And then the efficient use of CPZ staff time is where the state mandates certain times when we have to do inspections. And the way it was worded in our code, we were doing some extra inspections that are not mandated. And so we inserted language that would give us some flexibility. I think the best example I can give you of that is if somebody installs a mound system, the final inspection is one in which it's mandated, but there's other inspections about checking to see if the grass is growing on the mound system and different things like that. And it gives us flexibility to verify that instead of actually going out and doing an inspection. So that are the basic changes in the code. Does anybody have any questions?
Okay, is there any questions for Becky? Supervisor Gums?
Can you explain more about the inspections and how you condemn a sewage or condemn someone's septic system, and how do you decide where to go and who's to stop at, and just driving down the road, or does somebody have to complain, or how do you decide where to start, where to stop? Them kind of things I like to know. As I mentioned before, we were disappointed with the timing of the hearing. That didn't give sufficient time for the townships to respond. But maybe you can answer those questions about inspecting, deciding who to inspect, when, and is it simply a neighbor calling in, or how does it work?
Well, there's a variety of ways that it works. Most failing systems come to our attention because the property owner recognizes the failure and they're having problems, and they contact the licensed professionals, and we hear about it through a soil tester or a plumber. So that's the number one way they come into our knowledge, that we know that it's going on. In most of those cases, there's no enforcement order written at that time unless it's needed to obtain funding. And so that's the number one way they come in. We also receive complaints from property owners, neighbors, town chairman, whoever it might be, passerbys, and that comes in a variety of ways. And that's where, at some point, those properties would be, as any complaint is followed up on to some degree. And am I covering? Is there one in particular? We don't drive around. The bottom line is we don't drive around the countryside looking for failing systems. At this point, we have enough work with just the things that are walking, the permits that are coming in the doors.
But how do I know it's failing, or how do you know it's failing, is what I'm asking. What determines that?
A failing system is defined in the state statutes and administrative rules. A system can be failing by discharging sewage onto the ground surface. It can fail by discharging into some surface water, into some wetlands. It can be considered failing and not complying with the code if it's discharging into the groundwater or a seasonal zone of saturation. So if you have high groundwater in your property and it's coming in within 3 feet of where your system is, that would be considered a failing system. There's also failing systems where literally the sewage is backing up into your house and the system hydraulically won't take any more effluent, and so that system would be considered failing. So there's a number of ways that a system could fail, and how we come about determining sometimes they're failing by 2 or 3 of those factors.
Okay, Supervisor Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Becky, when did the state pass the ordinance or whatever that every 3 years you have to have it pumped or inspected? Or any system put in after that date? Would you know when that was?
Yes, well, that was back in the 70s. When the state came up with the Wisconsin Fund program, that's a fund that helps people pay for the cost of replacing a failing septic system. One of the caveats to get the money out of the state budget to set up the fund is that if that were to happen and we're going to give the citizens money to replace their system, then the decision was made by the legislatures, and we want them to maintain the system if we're giving you state money to install the system. So any county who adopted the Wisconsin Fund program, and that's the financial assistance program, if you adopted that, coming along with that would be your commitment as a county to do a maintenance program. So the majority of the counties in the state in about 1980, right around that neighborhood, adopted the Wisconsin Fund program because it was great financial incentives that was available to property owner. And with that, in 1983, those people who had installed systems in 1980, they were the first group of people to get a maintenance pumping notice in 1983, and then every 3 years thereafter. So that's when the program started. If you took the state money, you had to have the maintenance program, but it only affected the people who had sanitary permits issued after 1980.
Supervisor Schaefer,
But
follow
that
up.
didn't only apply to people that took the money to, grant money to, it applied to
Later-
any system, didn't it?
Later that changed, and they mandated that we expand the maintenance program about 10 years ago.
Without even giving money to help people.
No, the money would still, at the time they did it, there was still Wisconsin Fund money out there. The state requires the counties, at that point, 10 to 15 years ago, the state required all the counties to inventory all of their septic systems. I said that the ordinance went into effect in 1969. That's when we started having sanitary permits, and that's when we could track systems. Well, all the systems that were installed prior to that, we don't have any record of. So the state required us to go and inventory all those, find them all, and get them into the maintenance program. That's a state mandate, right?
Supervisor Seibert.
Thank you. I mean, what is the time schedule? How long does it take from when you hear of a failing system to go through the grant system and to get that system repaired? Is it a year, 2 years, 3 years?
Unfortunately, for the last few years with the Wisconsin Fund program, they've decreased the funding of that program, and it would take a long time, like over a year, for someone to get their money once they've applied for that Wisconsin Fund program. So if somebody were to have a failing system under the Wisconsin Fund program, in its heydays, back in the 80s and into the 90s, they could usually flip them in about 6 months. But the way they have the program set up here in the last 10 to 15 years, it could take up to a year or longer to actually get the check. And it was a grant, I should point out, that was a grant program. So you were able to get grant money that you would not have to repay.
Okay, and how much time do you have involved from when you start to the grant process?
When you mean,
From when you get wind of a failing system?
when we're notified of a failing system,
What are your steps and how long does it take until that grant is applied for?
oh, part of the thing, it can be months, but part of the thing, but part of the requirements are, they can't get any money unless the system is installed. So those are the systems that actually go in, they can go in a little bit quicker, because the quicker they get them in, the quicker they can get the money.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Gomes.
No, two other questions. Now, will you tell who tattled on me or you? I mean, if a person requests, back to how you're, can people come back and ask who referred you to CPC? You know what I mean?
Yes. It depends upon how it came in and whether or not someone asked for confidentiality. If you want a true confidential complaint filed, write it on a piece of paper, put it in an unmarked envelope, and send it to 210 River Drive.
I'm not going to.
That's about how confidential. It's very challenging with today's technology, with emails, voice messages, and all that, to be able to not know who's giving the complaint.
Okay, my last question is with the state fund, the Wisconsin fund, wasn't that divided by all the people that applied that year when they did that, or am I wrong? And I was wondering if our fund is going to be done that way, where it's divided equally amongst the people that applied that year a certain amount.
I will tell you that when the Wisconsin Fund started in 1980, people were eligible for about 60% of the cost of what that system. It was set up that way, where it is actually a percentage. If it cost you $2,000 to put in a holding tank back in 1980, you got $1,200. I'm doing my math right? $1,200 from the Wisconsin Fund. Well, as the years went on, the two things happened. The legislature started to decrease the amount of funding available statewide, And at the same time, we had the different building booms that happened in the 80s and into the 90s. And so you have more people applying for the money. And somewhere in that spectrum, the state implemented a prorating formula. So sometimes property owners, depending upon, and that's another thing, going back to Supervisor Sorbert's comments, that's another thing where you could, it's almost roll the dice. You had 3 years in which to apply for the Wisconsin Fund, and you were rolling the dice in terms of what was the money available and how many other people were going to apply, because in 1 year you might get 30% funding, and if you waited for the next year, you might have gotten 45% of the cost for funding. So recently now, they've decreased funding for the Wisconsin Fund to the point that we're sitting and waiting to see what Governor Evers puts in his budget for the Wisconsin Fund. It's on the books now to eliminate it, and they had funding set up to fund all the people that had failing systems through December 31st of 2017. So people who had failing systems last year, we don't even know if they'd be eligible for Wisconsin Fund. We have to wait for Governor Evers' budget to come out.
Supervisor Seiler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, you've started to answer part of my question, Becky, because I do recall Dale Diamond stating that that anyone that would want to apply for funds because they had a failing system would have had to be in the queue by December 31st of 2017. So I was just wondering where that fund was at this time. So then my question is, if with the spring coming on, and that's when the work would start for anyone that has a failing system, when the plumbers and everyone can get out there, what is the current status? I mean, so we don't know if there's any funding available in the Wisconsin Fund for homeowners?
Correct.
From the Wisconsin Fund, okay.
Correct.
So then we have to stay tuned for that. But then the second question is actually maybe more for Brad. The funds that were hopefully being created for the county fund, when would that be available? Because if people do have failing systems and the Wisconsin Fund is pretty iffy, how can we be prepared to assist those landowners who are going to have systems that need to be replaced? So where are we at that right now?
Well, we have the money, and it won't take long to put together a system. Once we get past iffy and it's no, then we'll be ready to roll. I don't think there's a lot of lead time required. I'm in charge of all the administrative policies, so I don't have to come back for approvals. We're going to try to keep it as seamless as possible.
To support Brad in his statements and his work plan, on the CPZ end of things, we have developed the criteria that we think we would be involved with in terms of the eligibility, and it's the same as the Wisconsin Fund if you're, the property owner, and et cetera. And we have meetings scheduled with McDevco to work out some of those details and how it would work. But one thing I will tell you is that part of our discussion when the county board made the decision to use the environmental impact funds for this is that everybody was interested in, I shouldn't say everyone, in the end, the interest was trying to maintain this fund and available to property owners at least through the period of time where there might be more failing systems identified. And with that known, one of the requirements that was talked about is having property owners applying for the Wisconsin Fund if there's funding available as part of their application process as they're coming forward for a loan. And that would help to sustain the actual fund here in Marathon County. If we can get state money into the county, the whole idea is if we can get state grant money into the county, for septic systems, we want to try to do that.
Okay. And so then perhaps a question for the chair. Is there still any possibility that the legislature would consider going back to something that when Marathon County had its ordinance, when the systems would be updated at the point of real estate transfer?
The discussions that I've had with the representatives, there wasn't a lot of likelihood that was coming back.
Okay. Then, if I may, one more question. So let's say in the unfortunate circumstance that there's just a real lag time from the governor's budget and legislature. Now we have systems that need to be replaced. Do we have any thought about the county stepping up and getting this? How long are we going to wait to see if there is going to be any more money in the Wisconsin Fund is ultimately the question.
Well, I will tell you that once the budget is introduced, we'll be able to figure out whether or not they're going to try to allocate any money or more money. So that's the starting point. And I understand from what I've been following, he's going to introduce his budget here.
February 28th.
Okay, shortly. I was going to say shortly. So if that comes out with goose eggs in it and there's no funding available, I mean, that would be an indication of where this would go, okay? And I will caution with the change of administration, but I don't even know what the priorities all are going to be in terms of this particular budget, but we really, if we're in that period of not sure, we're more not sure right now than maybe in the past. In the past, it was really clear they were trying to get rid of the program and not put funding in the program. So that's, now we're not sure because there's new administration. And again, this is what, as a creature of the state, where we have to have a private sewage code and they have fundings that could help us, it's what the state legislature decides. And yes, Marathon County has influenced what the state legislature does by, passing resolutions or talking to Wisconsin Counties Association. And most counties have always had the position that the state should have the Wisconsin Fund, well documented. We give lots of money to municipalities to maintain and upgrade their municipal sewage treatment systems. That's how this all came about to begin with.
Okay. Supervisor Gums, third and final time.
Okay, last question. Will the criteria, Mr. Chairman, come across the county boards? Will we see the criteria for applications, how much it is and what the criteria, will we see that, or is that something that zoning committee does themselves?
The way the ordinance was approved in creating the loan fund, that task was forwarded to administration as far as the criteria, but it was also spelled out that it was going to mirror the Wisconsin Fund and the application process that the Wisconsin Fund has today.
I have one caveat to that. We have several points that we know we can do better. Our idea would be if somebody needs funding, it sure would be nice, just like if you go to a financial institution right now and ask for a construction loan because you want to remodel your home, I think I can get money in a matter of maybe a week, okay? And with the Wisconsin Fund, it's a year and a half to even know if you're going to get the money. And so what we're going to try to do is mirror the Wisconsin Fund, and yet we know, because we've had the program for 35 or whatever years, we're going to try to make it more accessible to our property owners so they can get to the money faster, and especially because it's a loan, that they'll be able to access that money, similar to a construction. You think about how a construction loan works. They're going to give you money up front so that you can, get your contractor on the job and start working on a project. So.
Okay, any other questions for Becky? All right, I would, then we're back to the ordinance 0-1-19. I need a motion. Motion by Supervisor Schaefer and second by Supervisor Robinson. Any further discussion on that ordinance? Any further discussion? Seeing none, we will proceed to vote. And we will proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. And we'll move on to item number 14. Thank you, Becky. We will move on to item number 14, Infrastructure Committee, items A, B, C, and D. And I first recognize the Chair of Infrastructure Committee, Supervisor Robinson.
In light of the concerns that were raised last Thursday as it relates to the county's approval of the ATV trails or use of ATVs, UTVs on county roads, in talking with Michael from the Corp Counsel's office and Jim Griesbach, we've decided to pull those and reevaluate the county's ordinance to make sure that it's complete and adequate in protecting the county's interests as well as trying to allow for reasonable use by ATVs. So we're withdrawing those and we'll be revisiting the ordinance and bringing a recommendation back sometime in the future.
Okay, so the chair has withdrawn, the chair of Infrastructure Committee has withdrawn items 14A, B, C, and D, and we will move on to resolutions. From the Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee, item number 15, initial resolution authorizing not to exceed $2,295,000 general obligation promissory notes for capital improvement plan resolution R-4-19. This does require 3/4 majority of the full board. Any discussion? First, is there a motion? Motion by Supervisor Zareni and second by Supervisor Christensen. Any discussion on the resolution? Any discussion on the resolution? Supervisor Bovee.
Mr. Chairman.
Please take a mic. It's on the recording.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try and keep this short because I don't like listening to my voice any more than you do. Back in the day, in my early 20s, I was in the Navy and I wanted to buy a guitar. Wanted to be one of my rock star heroes. So I went down to the Navy Credit Union and I decided to I asked them for a loan, and dang, if they didn't want me to pay even more for the guitar with interest. So I said, no, I don't want to do that. So I went back to the barracks and I sat down and I made a list of all the different things that I spend my money on. And then I categorized them. And I looked at them and I said, you know, in the biggest categories, there was a lot of things that I could do in my life that would save me a lot of money. And so I did them. And pretty soon, I had enough money to go out and buy this musical instrument. And ever since that day, I've been doing the same thing. I put money away. I cut fat where it's necessary. And I can go out and I can buy what I need within my own means, okay? So there's an opportunity cost that when you pay interest, that money could be used somewhere else. My second point on this is that I understand that our legislature down in Madison has put the squeeze on Wisconsin counties. But the will of the voters has to be considered in this. In Marathon County, the voters overwhelmingly and regularly return the same politicians to the state Senate and the Assembly with the message of smaller government, less debt, and please live within your means. The voters merit what they demand, and who am I to argue with them? So you have my reason for my vote this time. Okay. Thank you.
Supervisor Stark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I bring into this a little bit of experience from having served on CIP as a chair, and when we came forward with this proposal to the full board, I'm not on CIP this time around, but I am on finance. And one thing I learned, and that's serving on CIP, that virtually everything on the list, as is even explained in the resolution, is primarily irreparable or beyond its useful life. The things that are on here that we're borrowing for. And I saw things on there that were on there for literally dozens of years. Infrastructure, roofs, things that needed to be fixed that we just didn't fix because we didn't have enough money. And then it only gets worse, and then we were doing disaster management. All right, and I know as well as anyone, having had scathing letters and calls from people with the infamous registration fee for what amounted to 50 cents a frickin' week. All right, here, what we're talking about is fixing things. We're going to reduce the CIP list of things to do by nearly half by doing this, and we're going to avoid disaster management, which typically costs more than maintaining infrastructure. So I would urge this board to vote in favor of fixing. This isn't like dreams of like wanting to have, in no disrespect, having a guitar. This is fixing failing infrastructure. So I would urge us all to vote in favor of this resolution. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? All right, is the board ready to vote? We will proceed to vote. And we will proceed. And the motion is carried. The requirement is 29 to pass, and the vote is 29 to 2 with 7 absent. Moving on to resolution number, agenda item E16, resolution declaring official intent to reimburse expenditures on capital improvement plan projects from proceeds of borrowing, resolution 5-19. Supervisor Stark with a motion. And Supervisor Wagner with the second. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we will proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. Moving on to item number 17, approval of 2018 budget transfers from Marathon County Department of Appropriations, resolution 9-19. This does require 2/3 majority of the board in present. Supervisor Longenhahn with the motion. And Supervisor Zhang with the second. Any discussion? Any discussion? We will proceed. We'll proceed to vote. And we will proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. Item number 18, approve 2019 budget transfers from Marathon County Department of Appropriations, resolution 10-19. What is your pleasure? Supervisor Boots with the motion and Supervisor Christensen with the second. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we will proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. Item number 18A, resolution amending the 2019 capital improvement budget and the 2019 through 2023 capital improvement program to purchase land at 1212 West Street, Wausau, Wisconsin, and to fund the land purchase. Resolution 12-19. Supervisor Budke with the motion, Supervisor Stark with a second. Discussion. Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm just asking, I'm kind of assuming that since it's on West Street that it has to do with the highway department. Is it like for future expansion or I really don't know why we're purchasing that land, and I guess I'd just like an explanation.
Well, it does fit into the West Side Master Plan and the long-term plan for the county that this board has adopted. And it came to us at the opportune time, and the cost is for the land. Supervisor Schaefer.
That's, you answered the question. Thank you, Mr.
Okay. Any other discussion? Any other discussion? This also requires 2/3 majority, and we will proceed to vote. And we will proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. Item F, Human Resources, Finance, Property Committee, and Health and Human Services Committee. Item number 19, amend the 2019 budget to create up to 3 FTE economic support specialist positions in the Department of Social Services and provide funding via the state Wisconsin Enhanced Funds. Resolution 8-19. Motion by Supervisor Zereni, and second by Supervisor Zhang. Any discussion? Any discussion? Supervisor Gomes.
Well, what happens when that fund is depleted? Will we still keep those people or what?
They're always, they're funded by that, and so if those funds were depleted, the positions would be eliminated. Any other discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. And we will move to Environmental Resources Committee, number 20, North Central Wisconsin Stormwater Coalition Cooperative Agreement Renewal, Resolution 6-19. We got Supervisor Seifelt with the motion and Supervisor Drabek with the second. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. Item G, number 21, DNR Lake Grant, Building Community Capacity, Water Resource Protection, Resolution 7-19. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Schaefer and second by Supervisor Lang. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. Supervisor Schaefer, please vote and confirm. Thank you, and we'll proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. From Infrastructure Committee, resolution for release of controlled access rights, State Road, Village of Hatley, Resolution 11-19. Supervisor Robinson with the motion. Supervisor Gomes with the second. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we will proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. Item HH, Human Resources, Finance and Property Committee and Infrastructure Committee, resolution to transfer of permanent limited easement from Marathon County to the town of Rib Mountain, Trillium Lane, and transfer a temporary easement from Marathon County to the town of Rib Mountain, Trillium Lane. Resolution 13-19. What is your pleasure? Vice Chair McEwen with the motion. Supervisor Robinson with the second. Any discussion? Any discussion?
Will that have a new address there?
We'll find out in June.
Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. We'll know in 120 days. The motion is carried. And under miscellaneous business, announcements and/or requests. Supervisor Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can we make sure we get all of these nonprofits that we give the money to that were not mandated? I know we had a couple already, so we get those all in before we get to budget time?
You bet.
Okay, thank you.
Any other announcements? We need signatures from Infrastructure, HR, Finance and Property, and Health and Human Services. Any other announcements? All right, I will take the motion. Supervisor Zhang with a motion to adjourn, and Supervisor Rosenberg with a second. Any discussion? All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.